morning. We are Team Southwest Airlines. We actually monitored on-time performance for them. My name is Brandon Cabello, and this is Stacy Moskowitz and Courtney Gennard. This is kind of an agenda that we're going to review with you guys today. So kicking us off, we'll talk about what the client was looking for or what makes them happy. Then we'll get into kind of a description of Southwest Airlines in reference to our problem. We'll look a little bit into kind of our analysis on a line basis, a leg basis, and then we'll look into some airport analysis and some recovery information, and then share with you guys some of our recommendations. So to kick them off, let's go through kind of what was our client looking for. So this kind of shows kind of a description. So we partnered with Southwest Optimization Group, and they told us that they wanted us to help improve on-time performance. So right now they make a forecast that looks at a schedule and it spits it out, and they use this, and for the most part it's pretty reliable. They use a Monte Carlo simulation. What they wanted us to do though is that when they do have issues, they go by and they look at legs. So an example of a leg here is if you see DFW to Los Angeles, that's a leg, and so they'll look for trends and issues in that space. But what they wanted us to do is look more at a broader perspective and look at a line basis. So all three airports here would be considered a line. What we could understand by looking at it from a line basis is there any ripple effect? So for example, if the first airport was late, are the remaining flights going to be late for the rest of the day? And then also, is there any recovery efforts too? So if the first flight was late, if the first flight was late, then at the second airport, was that second airport able to recover? And so if we did see either the ripple effect or we did see the recovery efforts, what we wanted to do is kind of dig into that, find out where that's happening, what airports it is, and then make some recommendations on what we can do to help the overall line. A little information about Southwest. So right now, they operate actually over 500 flights or aircrafts and over 68 different cities. So they actually operate one particular Boeing model. It's a 737. And so the reason why this is important is because it's one of their secrets to being efficient. All of their mechanics are trained on this one specific model. So anytime there is issues, this service time actually impacts turn times. And so because the mechanics are all familiar with that one type, you don't have to wait for a particular engineer to be ready to help fix that aircraft. When we got the data from Southwest, they actually gave us 1 month worth of data. It was January 2009. And the first thing that we did, it was for all their flights. There was about roughly 77,000 flights. And we took the data and we put it into, we filtered it into the top airports by the most departures. And the reason why we wanted to do this first is because it kind of gave us an idea on where the Southwest have the most customer facing. And here's the snapshot of the top 10. And so when we did our analysis, either by leg on-time performance or line on-time performance and airport performance, we wanted to pay close attention to these because if there is lateness at any of these airports, you're going to have the most customers who are going to experience it. And then if there is lateness, there's going to be some cost related to that as well. So we kept this in mind as we continued our analysis.
All right, so we took the data and separated it into two segments, line data and leg data. And a leg is defined as starting at one origin and going on to the destination and then ending there, whereas a line is described as multiple legs into 1 day's worth of flying. So we found out that there were 78,000 legs, which made up 15,000 lines, and we use these segments to analyze on-time performance. 56% of Southwest flights are on time, and the stat can be used to compare Southwest to other airlines as well as gauge customer satisfaction.
Here's just a snapshot of the lateness count by line. So she mentioned that 56% of the legs are late, but when we looked at an actual entire line, we were able to determine that roughly about 20% of the lines were late. And so we would use this later when we did analysis to figure out where are these legs being late or where are these lines being late, so that moved us into our next section, which is airport analysis. But also another key statistic is Courtney's about to do.
Okay, next we're going to talk a little bit about recovery time. As Brandon said, about 20% of the lines are actually late, which is about 3,000 lines, but only 10% of these are actually recovering. So this tells us two things. One, that there is a ripple effect, that once one leg is late, generally the other legs tend to be late as well. Also, but there are 10% recovering, so we kind of wanted to take a closer look at which lines were recovering and why they were recovering. So elaborating a little bit more on the lines late. So this is a table, and it shows exactly, the red shows which legs are actually the delayed flights. And as you can see, the recovering ones, these are all recovering flights. recovery doesn't happen necessarily right after the lateness, so it could be a couple flights later, then it's able to catch up, and that's still considered a recovery. So this leads us to talking about our next point that Brandon mentioned. We started to look a little bit more about the certain airports and trying to decide which airports were the most effective. And this is actually just a little brief snapshot. We used a program to help us count the late and on-time arrivals by airports. That's what this is, a little snapshot of those. And it also calculated the probabilities that if you arrive at a certain airport that your flight's going to be on time or late. So later we'll show you the top 10 and worst 10 airports.
So using that data as far as probability on airports, we then created a box plot. The box plot kind of gave us the range of the data. On the lower spectrum, there was a couple airports that were only having 13% of their flights that were late. And on the highest spectrum, there was about 68% of the flights that had, airports that had flights that were late. So that gave us the range. And then in the middle area, that's kind of the average. So what we could do with this box plot was then we made the histogram that allowed for us to create 4 bins. And in the certain bins, what you can see is in the middle ranges is where that blue and turquoise section was when we did our box plot. That's kind of the average for Southwest. So even though it's the average for Southwest, it may not be an acceptable level of lateness, but at least it lets us know where our outliers are. So on the 0 to 36 range, these are the airports that have very low lateness, even 0 to 36. And so what we can do with these airports is go into them, look at if there's any best practices tied to what they're doing, and see if we can share that with any of the other airports in the other bins. Another thing that would be interesting to look into more, which wasn't in our data, is at these airports, because they have low lateness, is there high cost tied to that? I mean, does that require a higher number of employees to make that happen, a higher number of mechanics, or any type of activities that would require to make sure you maintain that high level of customer satisfaction and cost? And then in the upper bucket, that 47 to 68, that's definitely where we recommend spending most of the time, because that's where you're experiencing the most lateness at these airports. And then, as we mentioned earlier, there's some couple high airports, those top 10. If any of those top 10 airports are in that bucket, then that's something we definitely want to recommend from Southwest to spend time trying to fix because of that great customer experience or facing impact.
So based on the histogram, we have taken 20 of the best and worst airports based on on-time performance and put them on a chart. The red labels actually are Southwest's top 10 departure airports by volume. So attention needs to be paid to these airports because customer impact and costs incurred by lateness can be very great. So finally, we'd like to move on to our recommendations. And I would like to close by recapping our analysis and making recommendations. So 20% of our lines are late. We found that lateness was due to some troubles in airports. Although some airports are consistently late, there are others that are consistently recovering. So we recommend that Southwest should address the turn time issues at airports with high probabilities of lateness, as well as looking up to the airports with high probabilities of on-time performance for examples of best practices. Recovering airports may be the key to improving turn time performance, or turn time and on-time performance at underperforming airports. Any questions?
Are there certain airports that tend to recover more than others, percentage-wise? Remember?
We have
That's pretty good. I didn't have a recovery piece, did it?
No, actually, it's not in the data, but if we were to go back and filter by that, we could see that there were airports at higher levels of recovery.
Yes, Kyle.
Were there certain routes that you found had more recovery, like going from a
Yes.
really slow airport to?
Those airports typically, well, the ones that didn't recover obviously are on this side, and the ones that did recover are mostly on this side, so there were lines that had greater recovery than others.
How did you define a wait line? Just it had a one wait leg on the line?
Yeah, even if it could have anywhere from 1 to however many legs it had, and it was just, the whole line was still considered a late line,
Okay,
unless
so,
it recovered.
so a line, a line is basically one plane throughout a day.
Just following that same
Okay,
line.
the same plane, so they go by tail numbers, so that defines a line through a day. But the late lines was lower than the late legs, so it means they must have been really clumped up. So when you're late, one
Well,
line just kind of
that-
generated all these late legs.
That pointed to a ricochet effect that just
They
cut
went down
the
that far.
entire line off target.
Okay, thank you very much.